Six youth movement until the end of 2010. And he co-devised and implemented the plan that led to the first day of the Egyptian Revolution on January 25th, 2011, which I was teaching a course on nationalism at that time, and it was very exciting because we would have to get on YouTube and find out what was going on in Egypt. So anyway, I will always remember that coincidence. Mr. Salah is also one of the co-founders of the Egyptian movement for change called Kifaya. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, which means enough. And he was one of its leaders until 2008. He also co-founded and led the first anti-Mubarak youth movement called Youth for Change. That was in 2005 and 2006. And he leads the coalition of the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution. So please join me in welcoming Ahmed Salah.
Thank you very much for coming here. Thank you for filling this room and giving us your time to learn about Egypt and what is happening in Egypt. What is, not what happened. So, I think first thing we should talk about is Egypt. What's so special about Egypt? Well, we have been studying a bit of history. We know a bit like ancient Egypt, all the glories of pharaohs, the first real government. You know that Egypt is called Masr in Arabic, which means the country, because it's been the only country in the world that remained as a country until now, with obviously clear borders and definite geography and people. There are many other things that we don't know, but they are very, very much taken for granted in our lives. Do you know, for example, where the 12 hours of the day and night come from? Where the musical notes come from. There are many things that come from ancient Egypt. But this is in the past, so we got to go ahead a little bit in history and talk about the recent history. Egypt had always been a very important player in the world history, whether it's in the Middle Ages or even recently. In recent times, like in the 18th century, for example, believe it or not, we had a parliament and a democracy that was that the king, in order to gain control, had to conspire with the British to invade Egypt in 1882, and they exiled the Egyptian government at that time into Sri Lanka. The struggle for democracy never stopped. One of the greatest revolutions in history is a revolution that probably most of you have not heard about. It is the revolution of 1919 in Egypt. This revolution was non-violent revolution, continued until 1922, demanding a total independence of the Egyptians from the British occupation. And that was successful to some extent. It actually was, according to the memoir of Gandhi, what had inspired him about the non-violence in the first place. The lessons he learned from the Egyptian revolution of 1919 was the one that taught Gandhi about non-violence. During that time, Egypt had probably the first strong and very flourishing feminist movement. Probably many of you don't know about that. There is more to say. Do you know, for example, that Egypt was the second country to have trains? The United States was the third. Egypt was the fourth country to have movies. Make and produce, and of course play movies. And that's why it is the leading culture in the Middle East, probably. So, in the Middle East and North Africa, what we call the Arab world, the influence of Egypt is huge. whatever that happens in Egypt has this reflection all through the area. After this little introduction, we have to understand that anything positive or negative happening in Egypt always has an effect in that part of the world and therefore in the rest of the world. So it's very important to see positive change happening in Egypt, not negative change, because this means that the effects are global in every possible way. We have been struggling for a very long time for democracy in my country. Under Mubarak regime, Egypt had deteriorated gravely. When he assumed power in 1981, Egypt was ranked number 44 according to the Human Development Report of the United Nations, and it had gone down to being the 128th after 3 decades of his tyranny. And during that time, you could see all the rise of terrible issues like terrorism, like the conflict between East and West, like ignorance and narrow-mindedness and all that. It's all linked. Everything is linked in the world. So you can see that there are very negative consequences to things like this happening in Egypt. Okay, I understand I don't have much time, so I'm going to have to jump in to the real business here. Like, what happened in Egypt? What really happened? And what's going on? We have been fighting for democracy, as I said, for a long time. We've been trying and failing. Trying and failing. Failing so many times. Almost going to the edge of total despair. Actually, most people have fallen into that and they gave up. And they stopped the fight. 2005, we thought that we came close. We were able to organize simultaneous protests all over the country. It seemed like a growing, huge thing, but then that was all ended in 2006 with huge crackdowns and very, very bad situation. I mean, in my case, for example, of course, I was in jail, tortured and almost killed. I had a bit of a long time of hunger strike, trying to have my location to be known. That was for 17 days. And it was like a hard time for us. Well, that didn't go without lessons being learned. And based on those lessons, there was supposed to be a plan to try to change something. In the very nice introduction that actually Megan had said shortly, she said that I was leading the only and first youth movement in the country in 2005 and 2006. This was ended because it was infiltrated and sabotaged. So one of the most important concerns for me was how can we make a youth movement that is against the regime that can be kind of immune to infiltration and sabotage. I started to have a plan for that and for building this, spreading it, and making a revolution by the year 2011. That was in 2008. Somebody would say in you, you're claiming you have made a plan for the revolution since 2008? You gotta be bullshitting me. Well, yeah, of course, because that sounds really weird. And I understand perfectly. But actually, you could all go online and you could search for one of the tables of the WikiLeaks that is dated to 2008. And in it, there is a description of someone who had had a meeting with the American ambassador talking about his plans for the revolution in 2011 and about the movement that he's building, which was April 6th at that time. And she described my plans to be highly improbable and completely unrealistic. So this is documented. Anyway, the idea was to build a movement that has 3 levels of leadership. Group leadership on every level with different tasks in order to avoid infiltration on the high level, and based on semi-independent small cells or groups of activists that are functioning in particular geographical areas in order also to avoid massive problems in case of an infiltration to a cell, because this would not affect the other cells. I've been trying to build this very hardly, very, very strongly since 2008, and that failed. Because one of the people that I have trusted, he had betrayed the trust. He was supposed to be the public face of the movement in a group leadership system, as I mentioned, and he decided to build a hierarchy surrounding himself, with only those loyal to him around, and forget about the real cause, the real strategic aim. He just wanted to be the leader and to be on the media. And no matter how hard I tried, that failed. So I gave up on this movement, because by the end of 2010, it was reduced into being a movement of about 2,500 people. 2/3 of them are against that person because of his dictatorship, and that's why this movement was split into 3 afterwards. And 1/3 was loyal to him, because he had chosen them and gave them some benefits. So the situation by the end of 2010 was like that. There is a plan, but there is no movement. So there is no way to make anything, which was very frustrating. The point was that by the elections of 2010, which happened in November, the parliamentary elections, I expected a lot of rigging to happen, and those small groups in different geographical places are supposed to spread the spirit of defiance and to build up this defiance for a revolution, possibly on the day April 6th of 2011, or in July 23rd, the day of the 1952 revolution in 2011. But that didn't seem to be possible. Still, something happened. You can come in. Yeah. Still, something happened, which was that a former member of the intelligence, his name was Ahmed Salah, he put near the end of the year in December on the internet his own personal details, being a major in the intelligence with his picture, and very disturbing information about the plans of the regime to destabilize the country and to make it on the verge of a civil war, so that they can pass this succession scenario without a problem by cracking down on everybody. That seemed very disturbing, but yet, what can you do? We are very weak. There is nobody really that can make any change. Then, the first of those disasters started by the end of the year. New Year's Eve, 2010-2011, December 31st. There was a bomb attack against a church in Alexandria called the Two Saints Church, which claimed the lives of about 4,000 people. That was a shock. They started talking about all these scenarios that seemed to be like a joke, like it was Hamas terrorists who came and blew up the church. Like, why would they come and blow up the church? What evidence do you have? And then they actually cleaned the scene of the crime without forensics touching it. So they cleaned the evidence to have no evidence. This meant very clearly that it was the regime that was behind it. So we started making a protest in an area in Cairo, which is a very big area. Actually, it's my area, which is called Shobra. And this area is very special because 1/3 of the population there is Coptic Christian. So it has the highest concentration of Christian population in that whole part of the world, over 2 million people. And we started protests there, hoping that we can get them involved in activism against the regime. We started our protest, and maybe a little more than an hour later, they started to come near the end of the protest. Some people from the area. They seemed to be very fanatic. Some were drawing a cross on their chests, some were carrying a cross, and they were chanting against Muslims, accusing us of being murderers. We spoke with them, and we managed to make them understand that it wasn't us, it's the regime. And this started something that was incredible. From that day, and for 4 days, we had these huge rallies of both Muslims and Christians against the regime and against their crime. This ruined all the plans of the regime about making the conflict between Muslims and Christians. And there are lots of details I can give about their attempts to try to create violence, violent incidents, and how that had failed. Anyway, unfortunately, that ended at the end. Because the religious institutions, they are controlled by the regime. They have to play along with the regime. In the case of Sunni Muslims, this is not really a big problem because Muslims don't have hierarchy. You can do what you want, you can think what you want. You don't have a father that you have to please and to listen to him and confess to him. But in the case of the Coptic Orthodox Church, of course, it's different. There is a hierarchy, and people must listen to what the church tells them. So it ended. Again, there is nothing. After starting to build something, we fell down again into the complete nothingness. At that time, as we all remember, Tunisia was getting really strong. Tunisia didn't start as a revolution. It started as riots and protests against the regime for demanding only political and economical reforms. It only converted later into a revolution, but didn't start as one. And it started spontaneously, not artificially, of course. But Tunisia was getting really strong, so many people started to try to do the Bouazizi thing. It burned themselves to death in different locations to bring to the people's attention the problems of the country. We did our protests. People would be passing by our protests because we are so small, surrounded by huge crowds of security. And they would think, we're crazy. Nobody's joining us. It didn't move anywhere. People were completely in despair. So even that was failing. So nobody burned themselves anymore because they understood it doesn't even make anybody move. January 14th was a day when something different happened. It started a chain of events that led to what happened on January 25th. And this is what I'm going to start explaining to you. Only a portion of that is what you have been hearing in the media. The rest, you will be hearing that probably for the first time. Because not so many people were involved in that. So, a former police colonel called Omar Afifi, who has political asylum here in America, he lives in DC, he had spoken about having inner information from the Ministry of the Interior, that it was the Ministry of the Interior that was behind the terrorist attack, and they will be behind other terrorist attacks, and that this is confirmed, and that there is a need to have a revolution on the day of the police. The day of the police is January 25th. A day that we have already planned to make a protest at, because we did that in the year before, and so on. And of course you would make a protest on the police day. You know. But calling for a revolution? Oh my God, has Omar gone mad? What revolution? You cannot call for a revolution 10 days before and expect anything to happen. Thank God not that many people listened to him. That was my idea. A few hours later, obviously somebody did listen to him and put this information on another place, on a Facebook page called We Are All Khalid Saeed. Khalid Saeed was a normal guy that managed to get a movie, a short video of that shows cops sharing or dividing the result of a drug bust. And because of that, he was beaten to death in front of his home to give a lesson to anyone who will actually reveal the corruption of the security. So he became a very famous case. And they started sharing this story, and the administrators started talking about the revolution on January 25th and calling for a revolution, and then other pages were talking about this, other groups, other like, oh my God, everybody's talking about a revolution. What can we do? That was the idea at the time. This is the impression. The next day, we political activists, we had to do something. So we met. We were not that many, actually. We were like crowding a room. We were maybe 70, 80 people from all different movements and even individuals, thinking about what are we going to do. And everybody wanted just to keep on with the original plan to have a protest at 2 p.m. in front of the Ministry of the Interior. And that was it. It was very frustrating. That's how that day ended. I went home very frustrated. Next morning, I had a phone call from a friend who was very frustrated like me, and we thought we would meet in the morning. So we met, and then a crazy idea came to me, and we did it. It was an idea that needed somebody to help me, because I couldn't do it on my own, being maybe a little embarrassing or awkward. I had this little ID card that says I'm a reporter. Not that it's fake, it's not fake, but I'm not a reporter. I've been using it to go to places, to have a first person, eye on what's going on, like with politicians and so on. Because you would be allowed to go in as a reporter. So I thought I would use this and talk with the people and listen to them. We went around from noon until about 7 o'clock in a few different neighborhoods in the Cairo side, which is the east side of the Nile, and the Giza side, which is the west side of the Nile. And asking a specific set of questions that I thought would be helpful to know how to handle this situation. So, hi, excuse me, we are reporters, and I'm showing that, of course, I'm flashing it, and so that they are confident and sure everything is okay. And we're making a story about the protests on January 25th. Have you heard about the protests on January 25th? What protests? No, I haven't heard about that. What are you talking about? Nobody knew. The next question. These protests are against the regime of Hosni Mubarak, because some people think that he had ruined this country. What do you think of Hosni Mubarak? I had very different answers. Some that were very supportive to Mubarak, maybe about 1/3. Some that were very anti-Mubarak, using usually bad words, that were about the 2/3. The 1/3 that was supportive to Mubarak would be saying exactly what they have been hearing on the media. Things like Mubarak is giving us stability, he is very wise, all world leaders have to resort to his wisdom, and the whole world is suffering, everybody is suffering everywhere, he's doing what he can, etc. Afterwards, when I tried to analyze this category of people that have been giving me these answers, it was very interesting to see that actually they were the poorest of all that I spoke with. The most suffering. That really changed my mindset a lot afterwards, as I should explain shortly. To try to explain why they would give me these answers, there are only two possibilities that I could think of. One is that probably they are saying this because they are afraid and they don't trust me and they don't want to say what they really think. The other is that they are actually brainwashed by the media and they really believe in what they say. Anyway, we'll forget about those. Let's talk about those that were against Hosni Mubarak, the dictator. They would say all these bad things, and then, okay, this is wonderful. You know what? I'm one of those who are organizing these protests. And this is our chance to get back what's really ours. We should all stick together and make this revolution, and bring down this regime. Are you coming? Of course not. Is that not crazy? That's a sample of the answers. Answers were always like, no, thank you, like, I will not do that, or, Why? Then there were three different answers. One that was related to fear, so people are afraid of being shot, disabled, killed, arrested, going to oblivion, or as we say in Arabic, going behind the sun, means like where no light ever comes to you, or being tortured, raped, and so on. There is another answer that was related to The total lack of hope. People had no hope, absolutely. What's the point? It's impossible. There is no way to defeat them. They have over 2 million soldiers. Who can stand against that? They have all the economy. They have all the money. Who can stand against that? Like, how many people you think they will come out in the street? Nobody's going to come. Why? I'm not going to put myself in this hell for nothing, etc. A third category of answers was related to the economy. People would tell me things like, if I stop working for a day, I'm going to lose my job. Can you feed my family? No, I'm sorry, I can't. Okay, I don't have the luxury. Sorry, mate. That left a place for only one more question, which was a key question. The thing about that question was, I hear that answer before, but we always hear things without really listening to them. Because they seem impossible, because they seem like difficult, or you cannot think about them, you don't want to think about them. That question was, so you're telling me you're against Hosni Mubarak, we are going out to the street and you're not coming. Will you ever come? Yeah. That was very surprising because I heard it from almost everybody. When? And there is the answer. When everybody else goes out there first, I will go. When I see them with my own eyes, then I'm not going to stay at home, I'll join them. If it is the big day and the real thing, I'll be on the front line. Nothing is going to stop me. Wow. Okay. At the end of the day, actually, I was very frustrated because I started to think of these results. One, we have always been thinking that our tool is to make the poor people rise. Actually, poor people, in this case, they have too much burden that doesn't allow them to rise. The lack of awareness, lack of information, not standing on solid ground, so they have too much at risk, too much at stake, and so on. So we have to change our strategy. This is one. The other thing is, for quite a few years, we abandoned the street as a way to organize and started to resort to the internet as an answer to the repression. Each time we call for a big event, lots of people seem to be joining, and they never show up. Why? Because actually nobody hears about that. Because it's only a community of keyboard activists in a virtual reality, not in the real world. So they press a button. This is their participation. We go there. It's only us. And they never come. They never interact with their friends. Tell them about it. Neighbors, family. Nobody hears about it. It's these guys lonely with their computer and keyboard. So, we cannot depend on that anymore. This is wrong. We have to go back to the old tactics. We have actually to work on the street and mobilize people again on the street. The last result, which is very important, as I said again, was if you want to get people out, you have to get people out. And this is impossible because it's like the chicken or the egg question. How can you get people out to get people out? Makes no sense. Okay, we have failed. It's over. There is no way to have a revolution. It's only like a week left. And there is no plan. Okay. Afterwards, trying to sleep at that night, I started to have some ideas. Ideas about how to solve a few of these very impossible situations, which seem to be obviously like unchallengeable challenge, like something that you cannot work around. So, if we need to get the people out, we have to focus on a different category. What we need is lower middle class youth to be our target. This has to be our target group, not anymore the poor, because they will not join us. Lower middle class youth would be the ideal because they have the economical problems, they have the education, meaning awareness, they have no responsibilities, so they don't have much at stake except for themselves. And we have to try to target those. Now, how can we get them involved? That's going to be very hard. All this was not because I was trying to make a revolution. I was only trying to calculate a possibility to save the day. Until January 25th, I had no idea this is going to turn into a revolution, although I was talking to people about a revolution. I was lying. I was lying, yeah. I was just trying to get people excited, but I didn't think there will be a revolution. So the idea started to develop in my mind, like, why do we have to base my old plan on a movement? Now the idea of the movement had failed. There is no way to do this. Does it have to be members of a movement? Do they have to be even political activists? No. It doesn't have to be like that. All I need is people who belong to that target group that I have in mind, because they can be motivated in different spots that I can teach them the necessary skills, which I will explain. But then how can we solve the problem of the need to get people out, That seemed to be a real challenge. But then an idea came to my mind. It's not only about how many people when you think there is a crowd. There is another factor. It's not only how many, but in how big of space. We have always been choosing large spaces in order to make our protest, because we thought this is the best place for people to come to us so we can expand. And this never happens, because we are so small, surrounded by the troops, and who would dare challenging that and joining us? So it had always failed. I thought this must change. What we need is to start this by those small groups in the narrowest alleys, in the back streets, simultaneously, in as many different points as possible. This means that as the person who had helped me with this plan, Omar Afifi, this colonel, the former police colonel that I spoke about, who is someone I respect but disagree with at times about his plans because he's a little too confrontational being a cop. And I am more into nonviolence, of course. But anyway, he had said to me, he had assured me that the tactics of the security in this case is to withdraw, because they are not going to make their lines very thin in the back streets in different areas, fearing that they could be ambushed, and they are going to strengthen their lines so that they can stop the rallies and attack them. The idea, the conclusion, was that if we can actually create the following: different groups in different spots, hot spots as I would call them, in as many different cities as possible, as many different places as possible in every city, and they started from these back streets. Most of the cities will be clear of security because they are not going to risk being ambushed in these back streets. Those guys are going up and down in the small alleys, strengthening their numbers, and then go in the normal streets in the area, and then go around the area, and then head to the central point in every city that we wish to occupy. This became the plan. But what is this plan lacking? A very important factor. Who's going to do it? There's nobody. But actually, an idea came. There is a possibility. During 2010, hundreds of thousands of Egyptians had put their signature and personal information and ID card details on something that was called a statement for change, which was, with 7 demands, almost demanding a removal of the Mubarak regime and democracy and everything. So anyone who had put his information on that statement for change, they have done a huge, not step, but leap from being inactive, normal, apolitical, law-abiding citizen into an enemy of the state. Put themselves in danger. And what we need is to try to connect with these guys if they fit the category. My fiancée, who is not with me here, but of course, she was very important in the revolution. Not because she's my fiancée, but because she was. She had a very important role because she was the one that collected the highest number of signatures from those people. She collected actually thousands of this information from those thousands of people who participated. So we had a huge database to work on, based on geographical zones, based on age, and with the fact that they are against the regime. They said it to you. So the effort started to try to get several groups of those people based on their geographical backgrounds to come and meet me, so I would tell them the following. A lot of fiery words about the need to change, which of course they know that they need a little energy, and the revolution that is coming, and that they are not alone, and that if they would follow the plan, no security will ever be able to face them because security will never go and chase them in the back streets, and give them the tactics and the tools necessary to actually do what is needed to be done. What is needed to be done is to prepare geographical areas, meaning neighborhoods or small towns, and how to do this for the revolution. There are different tactics that can be used. How to spread, how to distribute flyers without being caught. How to write graffiti without being caught. There are formations that I have kind of invented. Yeah, I did a lot of things, I'm sorry. So you think, he's bullshitting us. But actually, I've been teaching this to many different activists in different countries. There are formations, there are time limits, there are ways to move from one point to the next without showing in what seems to be a random way and all that. So there are ways to do things. If you do them properly, you can avoid being arrested very, very well. And rumors that they should spread, which was actually very effective, even beyond my expectation. One of the funniest rumors that I have to mention, that I said without expecting it would have anything to do with what's going to happen, was aimed to spread at grocery stores so that housewives would be talking about them and spreading them, which was that on January 25th, the country would fall into chaos because protests will erupt everywhere. There will be a curfew and martial laws, and no one will be able to buy any food supplies. So every house must buy as much food as possible, or they will starve. I didn't think any of that will happen. Actually, it did happen on January 28th, so I wasn't far from truth. We have been doing this effort like crazy in Cairo and in a few cities in the Delta, all the way to Alexandria. Except for one city. That city is a city called Mahalla in the Delta, because it had a very special situation. This city was in a revolution in 2008. The regime used the security forces of 5 governors, like 5 states here, to crush this city alone, and they were crushing it for 3 days. So it was a very heavy fight. Ever since then, this city did not witness a single protest until January 21st. I got in touch with several activists from different towns in the Delta, and we all went there. We made the first protest ever in that city in order to awaken the city. Job well done. People seem to give a very positive response, and everybody said they are going on January 25th into the street. My idea was Mahalla does not need the artificial incineration of these protests. You don't need to start them artificially by all this backstreet stuff and all these amateurs. What you need is just to get the people to know. And this is enough. Because I was thinking that once Mahalla rise, the regime will do the same thing by pulling the security out of the other neighboring governors, which would clear all these governors from security, so it will allow all the amateurs I'm dealing with to rise, because they all had no experience with any activism or any protest before. Just to try to give it a little more chance. Thank goodness this was not the case because the revolution was everywhere. How would I expect? I expected most of those that I'm speaking with would fail. They would come very skeptical, listening to this crazy guy and what he says. And I really try hard, but then they leave, and then I don't know anything about them because I have to meet with others. And there was no way to follow up. There was no way to know who can do what or who is capable of doing what. I expected most of them to fail, but they didn't. They all did it very, very well. January 23rd was also an important day because I got news about something that I've been hoping to hear for years. You see, in Egypt, we have those soccer team fans that are organized. They are called ultras. We have those two competing soccer teams, Ahli and Zamalek, and their supporters are kind of organizing themselves because they love those teams very much. And I've been trying, because they are very organized, to get them into political activism for years, and I've been failing. As a matter of fact, in 2006, one of the leaders of one of the two factions stayed in my house. His name was Merrill. And I was hoping maybe through him we can get to attract these guys a little bit. But it was impossible. They never wanted to be in any political activism. In 2010, the regime did some mistakes because to make sure that they are in control of every power that exists, they also wanted to be in control of these guys. So they started cracking down on their houses and searching them and taking them to custody and then releasing them after the stick and the carrot, style stuff, so that they would control them. And these guys, they really hate control. So in the days before the revolution, I sent messages to both camps with a little trick, telling each side that staying at home and the other side and all that, and the other guys are going to be the ones that are the real men who can confront the security. So January 23rd, I had confirmation from both sides that they are going, and they are going to show each side, like the security, what it means to be true men. That seemed to be very comforting. Afterwards, those guys were the reason of our success. Without them, there would have been no January 25th. Without them, there would have been no possibility in many other dates, because they were always the spearhead and the frontliners. They were always the ones doing the toughest battles and situations. January 24th, what did I do? Nothing. I was so tired, scared of failure, and also thinking, what can you do? It's only 24 hours. There is no way to prepare a neighborhood. There is no way to do anything. It's over. Whatever that could have been done, it's already been done. Nothing more can be done. I couldn't even sleep at night until almost early morning. When I did sleep, I woke up with a phone call. When I answered the phone call, there was this sound of "Wah!" and someone shouting to me, "The whole town is on fire!" Not on fire like real fire, but like people, are out. "We take the security out, it's total civil disobedience," I don't know what. And I don't remember which town was this. I was still kind of sleeping. But afterwards, when I looked at the time, I remember it was only a little after 11 in the morning. Can you believe that? That was a shock to me. I thought, really? It's really happening? I wanted to get dressed, but then my phone kept on ringing with all these different people telling me about forming rallies in different neighborhoods, or actually cities being totally out, or cities that managed to take security completely out and to free themselves and to block the roads and stuff like that. And I managed to put on my clothes and get out around noon. Not sure where to go, because I wanted to go to see a protest, join it. I didn't organize a single one myself, which was a shame, but I never had the time or the opportunity, of course. And then, as I was thinking, which would be the closest rally that I heard about on the phone from somebody that I should go to? So I take maybe the subway to go there or something. There was one like a few minutes away from my home, a huge one in Shobras, my neighborhood. So I joined it. Some people recognized me, so I started like helping first and then leading. And we went from this neighborhood into downtown, close to Tahrir, into a neighborhood that is close to downtown, which is a little poor or middle class, and then back into my neighborhood, and then into Tahrir. Doing this in order to get as many people as possible, of course. And it was very big. It was huge. I never expected to see this. We arrived at Tahrir a little after 4. The battle was still in Tahrir. Most of the square was already liberated, except for half of the central part of Tahrir, or less than half, and there was a battle over there. The ultras were doing the confrontation, and those who can join them. We, the less fortunate person in sports, we would be throwing stones. Security was throwing stones using tear gas, of course, and water cannons. They haven't started shooting any real bullets or shotguns yet at that time. Later on, after midnight, they used shotguns in Cairo and birdshot, and in the countryside, they used live ammunition. Afterwards, it was live ammunition everywhere. So this battle continued until about 6 o'clock, when there was a ceasefire. After we got them out of the square and they were trying to get into the square. And we finally had the square. They stopped attacking, so we stopped defending. So that was it. Until a little after midnight, there was a huge attack. It was massive, and they managed to get us out of Tahrir. They used shotguns and they used a huge amount of tear gas. And it was impossible to stay there with all that. We got out. I was with a rally that was trying to go back to the square, and it was impossible, so we went back to our neighborhood, my neighborhood, Shobra. We arrived there at 2:30 in the morning, and then a few trucks came, unloaded their soldiers. As soon as they came out and lined up, they started shooting. So this kind of made me lose my mind, and I ran to them like, "Why are you shooting? You already got us up to Tahrir. You think these people would remain there forever? It's going to end. Just let it end peacefully. People will have to go home." So an officer told me, "No, we are not stopping. They killed a fellow officer, and this is payback time." I was arrested then, and I didn't know if this was for real or not, but afterwards I knew that this was a lie. I think probably that they were telling this, the police officers this story to make them more charged against us, that protesters had killed a policeman, but this never happened at that time. Anyway, so I heard this very big, like, authoritarian voice telling me to, saying, "Is that you? And get me this SOB." And like, they brought me to him. He was the chief of police in the area, and he told me that he's going to teach me a lesson that I will not forget for the next 40 years. I'm actually 45, so he knew me because I've been negotiating with him before the release of activists during the earlier protests in Shobra that I told you about. And he told his guys to discipline me. So the first thing that happened was that this guy, he took my glasses and smashed them with a lot of anger. So I was a little surprised, foolishly, like, why the glasses? But then the answer was this very, very violent punch that smashed my nose and put me kind of in a stunned situation, which was a big mistake on their side, because I didn't feel a thing. 4 guys were... I remember that there were 4 guys, giving me everything they have with their hands and feet, and all that happened was that I kind of started to gain my conscience in a microbus and realized that my nose is smashed somewhere else and I'm bleeding and all that, and that I lost my wallet. So I was in custody for about 3 days under bad circumstances that are nothing compared to what happens now to activists, because the only problem was that they put us in a very overcrowded ward of central security on the floor with limited access to toilets so that people would have to do it in the same place. We were 300 people crowded in one side because the other side had to be used for a replacement of toilet. That was very hard, but it's nothing compared to what happens. During this time, there were many people that were injured, and no doctors would take care of any of us. Finally, I was taken to a prosecutor office, and I was thinking that I was taken randomly because this guy saw me, but actually what happened was, after going there to this prosecutor, I realized I was a wanted man already. I was accused that, I was told that there was a warrant for my arrest from the afternoon of January 25th, accusing me based on the investigations of a state security officer whose name I know, Hisham Larey, because he was responsible for dealing with us, of being the mastermind of a conspiracy to overthrow the regime and attack police officers and sabotage public and private property, etc. I denied all these charges, of course, and I just said I was going home. I was attacked and, mobbed, and they took my wallet and all that. So then there was a question that I couldn't answer very intelligently. I had to give a very lame answer. But you were arrested several times before. So how come you were arrested by chance this time? So the answer that I had to give at the moment was, and I don't know what kind of answer you can actually give to that, was, well, you live in a country where you would have to get arrested every few feet. I don't know. What can you do? So I thought, okay, it's done. I'm going to hell. Like, it's over for me. And I was back in custody in this court for like a night or something. And then something strange was happening. The security seemed to be kind of confused, and they don't know what to do. And they suddenly took us out and divided us into 3 groups, put in 3 different prison trucks. They drove each truck separately, obviously, and then they dumped us in different places. So in my case, it was an area in the east of Cairo that I've never been at before. I had no idea what was going on, of course. And afterwards, I realized what was going on, which I can explain to you. That was January 28th, when the security failed. And because they failed, they had no possibility of organization and a chain of commands. So every bunch of officers did what they thought they should do. This actually gave very drastic results to some, because they killed. I was among those that were lucky to be released. So I think I had gone through lots of very lucky coincidences. I was out in the street, not knowing where I was, with my nose displaced and my blood everywhere and all that very suspicious looks. My clothes are torn, but there were no people in the street. I wouldn't want anybody to see me in this condition because I look very suspicious, but anyway, there wasn't really any. Only some military, and of course I had to avoid them. I had to walk a long way to try to get to my area. Finally getting there, I thought I would go to a hospital, and maybe this would help me figure out what's going on. So I went there, like, I need to fix my nose. I was very worried about my nose. What do you expect? And what, like, please can you fix it and stuff? No, we can't. What do you mean? This is the second biggest educational hospital in Cairo. And you cannot help me fixing my nose? We have nothing. The whole country is in chaos. The whole country failed. Sorry. What do you mean? Like, I really need to fix my nose. You cannot let me go like that. So finally, a doctor gave me an address of a place to go to get like something that has a name that I don't remember, like some kind of support, stuff for the nose, and said, come back with that and I'll fix it. I went there with no money, and I had to beg them until they gave me that, and I went back to the hospital, but they didn't want... The guy wasn't there, and nobody wanted to help for a while until I got another doctor who said that he will do it. But, sorry, we have no anesthesia. So if you're going to take it like a man, it's fine. Otherwise, I'm not going to do it with you. And I said, okay, just please could you get somebody to hold my head? So he got somebody to hold my head, and started this most disturbing process because he kind of broke a few things and put a few things, I don't know, like some crazy stuff. But like all bad things in life, you know, everything passes. So I went finally home wanting to know what there is no internet. Did they get to my internet? That was a very big mistake. Not that they got to my internet, but that was the day when there was no internet connection in the country. They cut it all over the country. Why is it a big mistake? You remember my story earlier about the keyboard activists? Yeah? Now you are a keyboard activist. There is a revolution going on, and suddenly, intensity of the battle that happened at night and how many people were killed. And then I got into the square itself, and I realized that there's a huge amount of military in their tanks around, and there were even some military vehicles and armored vehicles that were burned. That, of course, they removed immediately because they didn't want that to be seen by others. Because the military started against the protesters, and they were shooting at protesters. But then because of the huge amount of people, there is this thing. The military commanders in the country, they only have a very small amount of troops that are completely loyal to them, that are willing to kill civilians, and the rest are not. So they had to stop because of that. And they tried again, and they failed, and they tried again, and they failed. I can tell you about that. It's just time is not helping you. You have to jump through lots of things. Anyway, so I heard people shouting that people are getting killed by the Ministry of the Interior. So I ran there like everybody else, because whenever we hear about danger, you just run to it, or you don't run from it. That's the nature, you know, of these situations. So I ran there, and I got into the street where they say people get shot at. Like stupid. And then I saw all these fires, and somebody's running, like trying to throw stones from here and from there, and I hear like the banging of something, and then I had something hitting my head, and I fell on the ground, and I was stunned for a moment because of this, and then I realized like there's blood in my head, in my hand, from my head, and then another guy that was not very far from me, trying to throw a stone or something, and his head was blown with a live bullet, so his brains were out, not very far from me, maybe a couple of steps or something. And then I started to hear something very weird in the middle of all this. I started to hear a sound that was a bit like this. At the beginning, for a moment, I don't know, after I heard it like a few times, I still was not aware what would that be. But then I started to understand when I saw the dust. The dust that follows this sound around. And I started to follow the dust as it comes out. Knowing what that was. That was a sniper playing cat and mouse with me. Shooting around me, waiting for me to make my move so he can shoot me in the head. Because I was in a very uncomfortable position on the ground. There is no way I could just jump out of range. It was a very surreal situation, looking at the dead body of this martyr next to me and hearing and following the dust and waiting for the next bullet that is going to hit me when he gets bored. And then someone actually pulled me from behind very quickly into safety because I was at the edge of the street. I wasn't totally in the middle. And saved my life. I never even managed to thank this person because by the time I managed to stand up and so on, I didn't know who he was. I didn't see. So anyway, this was the beginning for me to start with what we've had in Tahrir. The military tried again and again to destroy this revolution. January 30th, there were orders to use F-16s and very low flying on top of all the protest areas, all the squares. At the same time, orders were given to the tank divisions to move in, start shooting first in the air, and then start shooting at people. They disobeyed. The Air Force did what they were told to do, but the tanks didn't. They disobeyed. They didn't do it. So that failed. February 2nd, they escorted a large amount of riding let's say, hired criminals coming in with different weapons. Some were firearms and some were sharp weapons. And they escorted them all the way into the square, opened the square for them, and allowed them to attack us. This led to a very famous battle called the Camel Battle, because some camels were even used, not just horses and stuff. And it lasted for about 48 hours, 2 days, until we cleared the buildings and the flyover the bridge from the attackers, because it was a very slow progress as we were trying to get rid of the attackers, because we have only had stones to respond with against those weapons. So it cost us a huge amount of death toll, but finally we liberated the square again and we had control. And ever since then, there was battle after battle. The military understood they cannot defeat the revolution directly at that time and they need to contain it. So this is what they did, forcing Mubarak out without giving him a real trial, it's a mock trial, and then making deals with the Muslim Brotherhood and a few other powers in order to make sure that they would be loyal to them, and trying to divide the revolution by putting on pedestals and using what the media had been trying to give as a coverage. So they tried to spread the idea that this was an internet revolution. It's made as a conspiracy from foreign powers by those stupid and silly young people that are shown on television and media. This had been effective for two reasons. One is when real hardcore revolutionaries, of course, see this, they feel very, well, they don't feel very well about it because they think, oh, am I putting my life at risk and my friends got killed so that this silly boy or this silly girl will take all this credit and glory? Where were they when we were in this hard battle or this other situation? I'm not going to do it. I should look for a job and start getting on with my life. So we lost some revolutionary actually because of that. On the other hand, when it comes to the sofa party, as we call it, the majority of the people, the mainstream, sitting out there looking at TV, watching what comes on the news, they would think, so this revolution they're talking about was made by these silly people. Listen to them. Thank goodness we are not part of that. So this was quite effective in that regard for a while, but not for long. Oh, yeah. Anyway, as I said, the situation had been very bad. One battle after one battle, each one claiming loss of victims. One of the worst battles that I've been to was the Battle of Muhammad Mahmud in November, which claimed the lives of hundreds of people, about 1,040 according to the former Minister of Health, because not only live ammunition was used and shotguns, but also forbidden chemical weapons were used. So white phosphorus was used a few times, which had been burning bodies from inside out. So somebody dies after inhaling this, and their bodies would turn into charcoal in a few hours. VX nerve gas was used. Tabun gas was used twice. It was pumped into the square. Not in canisters, but they used the ventilation system of the subways in reverse to pump it out into the square. Something called CR, which is a canister that produces this gas-like crystals in the air that cause permanent damage in the lungs that can actually kill you after some years, if not immediately. I have been always with a gas mask, goggles, and a helmet, and wrapping myself with everything while I was there, and still my lungs are completely damaged by these things, despite all that. And there were so many battles afterwards. There was the Battle of the Cabinet of Ministers, for example, when they were machine gunning us, but at least they were nice enough to allow you time to hide. So the cars would move and they would open machine guns at you, and if you don't hide, you get killed. So those who didn't hide, they got killed. The last battle that had been going on and ending Friday was when we started a siege on the Ministry of Defense, on actually the troops that are protecting the Ministry of the Defense. You'll not reach it. It was a partial siege from one side of the city, and every day people were being attacked and butchered until finally they decided to end it in every possible way, and they made a huge, terrible, bloody attack on everyone and ended it on Friday. So many were killed, including some of my friends, and many people were injured very seriously, and many people were also put to jail. But the revolution continues. I am giving you these late dates, but actually it was going on since the beginning. The first big confrontation between us and the military started as early as March 9th, when the famous virginity tests were conducted, and conducted again now. What are the virginity tests? When they get female activists, they strip them naked in front of all the soldiers and they probe them. This is to give the highest possible humiliation so that they are sure that no females would go out in protests, because their families wouldn't allow this. Who would want to put their daughters in this? And so on and so forth. So this is pretty much the situation. We only have like 20 minutes left. There's so much more to say, but I have to give some time for Q's and A's. So I think I should probably stop now with my stories, and maybe afterwards, if any of you has time, they can talk to me about also other things. But now let's try to get some questions, if anybody's interested. Yes?
What do you think was the turning point in the Mubarak regime? You know, there was a moment that like really solidified for them that they weren't able to continue as they had been.
As I said earlier, this was a growing thing, and the more we continued, the more we managed to stay in the square despite all the attacks, despite all the attempts. Nothing seemed to work with us. And people started to know that what the media had been telling them about us is not true, because they would say the following, that we get paid in dollars and euros, that there are the agents of foreign powers over there from the Mossad in Israel, from the CIA in America, from Hamas, the Palestinians, from Iran, from Hezbollah, from even the Taliban, that they are in Tahrir, which makes no sense, but some people even believe that. But anyway, and that we are getting all this money, we are having group sex, we are having orgies, and we are taking drugs, and we are doing all sorts of like very, like the worst things for our culture. So this had led to an opposite result, because many people got curious about going to wherever they are giving all this money, wherever there is all these KFC free meals, and where you can have free sex, and So more and more people would go, they would realize that we are doing this very hard battle, and they change, they convert. And they go to their families and they tell them, and it spread. Then, finally, the labor unions intervened. The country was in total paralyzation. It was paralyzed. Nothing worked anymore in the last few days, because a huge wave of labor strikes, it was everywhere. There was no way to control. Only one solution left. Mubarak has to be out. So they had to do it because they had to contain the revolution. Otherwise, they would have lost power too. And this is what they are fighting for now, the military. They are doing everything possible to continue to be in power. Yes?
In your opinion, what will be the political future of Egypt's government? Would it be more oppressive or less oppressive?
Right now, oppressive, but the revolution continues. As long as you keep fighting, you will have to get somewhere. You are only defeated when you stop fighting. This is a very important lesson, because in our case, for example, we have always, in my case, I've always been fighting, never giving up, and our numbers were very small at many times. We were totally defeated in certain times, and almost had no chance for any success. But as long as you keep the fight, there is always a chance. Who would have thought that what happened on January 25th and followed ever since then would happen? I fell on the sidewalk after we got to Tahrir crying, not from the tear gas, but with all these feelings, like, where were you, all of these guys? I've been dreaming all my life to see this. oh my God, like, look at this guy, look at this girl, look at that, like, I'm just stunned by the amount of heroism that I am seeing that we managed to be the catalyst of. And who would have thought? If we didn't do what we did, there would have been none of that. So people are fighting. People are still resisting. People are putting their lives on the line, and many lose it. And they're still keeping the fight. And that means there will be a future. That means there will be a democracy. As long as you keep fighting, you will have to get there. Yes?
A lot of what happened hinged on the lower-level military troops refusing to
Yes.
shoot people. What's going on in military, the lower-level military now?
We get support from many people, even inside some of the worst troops that are used against us. Like, what are the troops used against us? The military police and special forces like 777, 999, and paratroopers. I personally got a direct message from one of the officers in 999, and through other friends we got messages from 777 and even some paratroopers of support. So it's all over the military. Not maybe with military police. Military police are always evil, I have to say. I'm sorry. This is the way it is. I never saw any support from anyone from the military police yet. But at least from the other branches of the army, even those that are the worst against us, we get support. And one of the 19 members of the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, which is in control of the country now, who is the commander of the Navy, had just resigned about a week ago. And he said in his resignation that he cannot be held responsible for the bloodshed of Egyptians at the hand of the troops. And he cannot bear this moral responsibility and so on. So, yes, it is happening. We get a lot of support from them, but like, what can you do? I mean, we cannot seek a civil war. We don't want them to use arms against each other. We have to keep this non-violent. And we have to continue this non-violent struggle, trying to occupy places and trying to show defiance, our defiance to this authority and our demand of its removal, and that we need a civilian interim government in order to make a true transition so that we have real elections and being free and fair and, you know. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your great talk. What do you think made it possible between January 25th and Mubarak's exit? What made it possible for groups to work together that previously that had a lot of conflicts potentially?
No, that's because it was not based on groups. That was not any political people that did this. If you have noticed, I mentioned that everybody that was involved, they were amateurs. As a matter of fact, not everybody, okay. The political activists altogether, those that I spoke about, they only made one of the over dozen rallies that happened in Cairo on January 25th. They made only one rally that comes from an area called Nahla. All the other rallies from all over the town, they were made by people. So it was not about organization. All those political movements and parties, they keep competing and fighting, and they are the only ones you see on the media for deliberate reasons. But the hardcore revolutionary on the ground, those who are actually doing the fight, they are not divided. We have learned how to work together in different groups because it's important to keep it horizontal. If you try to make a real organization, it can be destroyed. Whether it's by deliberate infiltration or co-opting of persons or by personal greed and problems and disputes. The most important thing is always to maintain the goal, the idea, to be your leader, not the rest. So we can all hardly disagree because we all want the same aim. This is how it goes. Yes, sir.
On the elections, why was the Muslim Brotherhood able to mobilize so much more?
Okay, I will tell you.
And all.
I will tell you. Regarding the elections, here is the story. First, a constituency before the revolution, you are allowed as a candidate in this constituency to campaign for 2 weeks before the elections. Afterwards, under the system that was created by the SCAF, the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, in order to give an advantage to the Islamists, it became like this. One constituency became 5 constituencies put together for the individual seats, 10 for the list. Okay? You are only allowed 9 days. How can you do that? It's impossible. I was a candidate and I withdrew. Because it makes no sense. It's impossible. There is no way to campaign. Even if you are a millionaire. How can you do that? How can you cover all this area and all those people? It's impossible. So it's over. Especially there is no way to use the media. This is one thing. The other thing. There is a case in court. Not just one case, actually. More than one case, and they are in the highest court level in the country, the Supreme Administrative Court. Because they are trying to clean the list of voters from 8 million fake names who voted in the last elections. People who do not exist and voted. Okay? So there is real fraud. There is real rigging. Not only this, they were allowed to make campaigning in front of the polling stations. Oh, this is a problem, huh? Even worse. Inside, they will actually direct you to vote for them. I was visiting some of these polling stations because I'm a candidate, I can enter. I withdrew only in the media, but not like for real, so that I could still see things for myself. I'm visiting a polling station, and then this guy with the beard. What's your name, my brother? Ahmed. Who are you voting for? Well, does it matter? Yeah, you have to vote for your brothers, the Muslims. Why? Because all those others, they are infidel seculars, but they are Muslim too. No, they are not Muslim. They only have Muslim names, but they are enemies of Islam. Okay, you would think this is very silly. Of course it's silly. It's a very silly argument. But 40% of the Egyptians are illiterate. 45% or so are under poverty line. What do you expect when they hear this stuff? When somebody inside the polling station is directing you and telling you this. Then, at the end of the day, when you see that they got 70%, it's a miracle they only got 70% with all this rigging. There are many cases that I could talk about. 300 judges were attacked by military police because they were trying to protect some polling the boxes after an election, and they were beaten up. Because the boxes had to change. Even after, they even needed to change. It's crazy. So, no way to have a clean election under the military. And this explains how come the Islamists had a majority before, because they had a deal before. Now the rules of the game are changing because they are getting more greedy. So there is a little bit of, let's say, uncomfortable situation between them and the military. They are still not totally against the military, and the military is not totally against them, but they are pushing each other a little in a poker game. It's very much like a drawing that I saw that is very funny. You can see those two guys. One with the beard and the white galabeya, and the other with the military uniform. They are shaking hands with their teeth like this, but each one has a bubble, with a picture, a different picture. So the military is imagining himself sitting on the shoulder of the Islamist, and the Islamist is imagining himself sitting on the shoulder of the military. Everyone is riding on the other, using it as a platform for their greed. This explains it. More questions? Yes?
How did you end up in the United States and talking about?
I have been coming here to the United States to have talks with American officials for quite some time. I've been doing this since 2008, having meetings with American officials. I was the only one, so they used to call me at times the foreign minister of the Egyptian opposition, because I would sometimes be, delivering messages from different Egyptian politicians who would never come here. I even testified at a public session of the Congress in early 2009, which was public, and I was against the Egyptian regime and against the American support to the Egyptian regime. And I've been doing this for quite some time because I don't like to ignore players in the game. The United States is a player in the game, very negative player that caused us so much harm, and we have to confront this and try to change it. So when I couldn't anymore be in Egypt because I'm a wanted man, and so on, I thought the only other place where I could have some effective activism would have to be here in the United States to try to create some change. So I'm speaking everywhere, I'm traveling all over the States, and I'm trying to get people aware, I'm trying to get people to understand, doing whatever I can. If that makes a difference, fine. If it doesn't, at least I'm doing what I can. Yes?
What's your personal criterion for whether the revolution has succeeded? How will you know in the future?
when we change the regime. We have not changed the regime yet. That's very important. Yes?
How come there's been this shotgun wedding between the Islamists and the military?
It's only about greed. Each side is more greedy. The Islamists are always trying to take one step at a time and then trying to go on top of everything. The military are trying to contain them and to control them for their own benefit. So this is where the conflict happens. That's all. It's just two greedy opportunist powers that are forced to deal with each other despite how much they hate each other. So it's this kind of, like gangsters having to deal together because they have to.
Question here?
Actually, I was going to...
Oh, sorry, yes.
There's a presidential election at the end of this month, right?
There was a court order today from the administrative court that postpones it, but I expect the military to try to make it on time because they want to rig it as soon as possible.
What is your understanding of the outcome? I don't mean who's going to win.
Yeah.
I mean, how will that usher in a new stage? Will it amount to demobilization of the revolution?
Of course, it will be another step. Like we have all these spikes, and like events happening. This will be one of those. So we expect another wave to happen, like the wave that just ended on Friday. Not really ended because people still are going on protests, but not as majorly, like hundreds of thousands like it was until then. So there will be definitely something happening. The thing is, the military, they prepare to be ruling from behind curtains using a puppet kind of president and government. And this is what they are really trying so hard to create. Whether in their deals with the Islamists or now with the presidential elections and their need to create that. Actually, I know that there are many questions. There is just one thing that I want to say here in the middle before everybody has to go because time is really running, and I'm really sorry. That there is something that you can do if you wish to help us in Egypt. And as I said before, helping us in Egypt is help to create change in the world because Egypt was the model for revolutions that happened in Egypt, and even as far as I know, being involved with the Occupy movements in different parts of this country, East and West. It has been an inspiration to the Occupy movement. So a success in the Egyptian revolution is vital. That is, I have to explain this briefly. Members of the Egyptian regime, including those generals, for decades now, they have been allowed a safe haven for themselves, their families, their business associates in the United States and other Western countries, and they have always been allowed to have a safe place to stash their lootings. So this money would always be coming. The law enforcement agencies are looking at them. They know what they are coming for, from who. They know how these assets start changing colors, looks, names, and shapes as it is being laundered. It's, of course, a crime internationally against the conventions of the United Nations to do money laundering and money trafficking. But when you look at the amount of these fortunes, they are incredible. They are huge. And of course, the United States, just like all the other Western governments, they look, this is our friends, the dictators of such country. In our case, it's Egypt, but this goes beyond Egypt. Let them do it. Let them be happy. We need to be in good terms with them. All right? So this has been happening for decades. It's not only about the $1.3 billion of military aid that goes to Egypt. It's not only about the fact that the tear gas and all this ammunition is manufactured here in America that we are being shot with, whether it's by CSI in Philadelphia or whatever. It's not enough that actually each time I'm under arrest and I look at my handcuffs, it says made in the USA. But more effectively, you can make a change if we can spread a campaign that demands that those members of the regime, including the generals, their families, business associates, will have no longer the chance to be allowed into this country, and therefore this will be setting an example for other Western countries, and that the assets, their lootings, will be frozen for their crimes, pending a return to the Egyptian people when there is democracy. Okay. Was there a precedence about that? Yes. In the case of Iran, and there are many other countries now that these things are happening. So it can happen. I think we still have time for one last question or something, but please just remember what I'm telling you. Please spread that if you can put it in media. If you can send messages to your Congress members, senators, White House, and so on. I'd really appreciate it. Put it in your own words. The law enforcement agencies, they know very well about these things. I cannot have this information because there is no concrete evidence in my hands. Very much like with how the former Minister of Interior had led a terrorist organization. We discovered this after the revolution, but until then, it was only what you see. Yes, sir?
How has Egypt's relationship with the surrounding countries changed since the revolution?
The Gulf is fighting the revolution, especially the Saudis, very much. They've been funneling money and they are trying to fund the counter-revolution. Israel is being very hostile to the revolution and they are trying to help the military very much, especially here in America. It's complicated. It's very complicated, of course. Politically, things are in chaos. Any other question? Last question, something before we have to go?
I think
Well.
we probably do have to go, I'm
Yeah,
afraid to
okay.
say, because there is another group coming
Yeah.
at 5 o'clock.
Well, thank you very much for coming.